Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of A Maker's Pilgrimage. I am Aiden. I am the Knitting Monk. You can find me on social media, mostly on Instagram, with the username Knitting Monk, and also with the same username on Ravelry. I also write a mostly weekly reflection on contemplative Christian spirituality, and you can find that at my blog, groundinginthespirit.wordpress.com. Also, the podcast and some writing on knitting will be available on my knitting blog, which is theknittingmonk.wordpress.com. And if that's not enough web material for you, then you can also take a look at the monastic community I am a part of, which is Holy Cross Monastery. You can find us online at holycrossmonastery.com. So I thought I would just start today by giving you a little bit of an introduction to me and to my crafting life. As I said, I am the Knitting Monk. So to break that down just a little bit, the first part is that I'm a monk. And what does that mean? So what that means is that I am a member of a Benedictine men's community. We are followers of the rule of St. Benedict. That's what the Benedictine part means. In the Hudson Valley in New York, which is about an hour and a half north of the city. The name of the monastery that I'm at is Holy Cross Monastery. We are a community of men in the Episcopal Church, whereas most Christian monastic communities are Roman Catholic. We're Episcopalian. And we were founded in the 1880s, 1884, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We've spent our history kind of all over the world, but the community I live in, which is made up of 19 men, in the range from 31, which is me, the youngest, to 89. Our oldest brother just turned 89 this week. And we're the oldest community in an order of communities called the Order of the Holy Cross, which at the moment has 4 houses here where I am at Holy Cross Monastery, in Santa Barbara, California, in Toronto, and in Grahamstown, South Africa. So here at Holy Cross, we run a retreat ministry for our bread and butter, and our original monastic house is now a guest house that accommodates about 50 people, and we welcome guests in the range of 3,000 or more guests every single year. And our retreats run the range from contemplative Christian spirituality to yoga to 12-step recovery, and we also provide a lot of space for individuals to come and be on their own retreat. A lot of people think of retreat and contemplation and monasticism as an escape from the realities of the world. But I think particularly as our world becomes more divided and more violent and more hectic, we do our best to serve as a witness that who you are is more important than what you do, that being is more important than doing. And we hope that we empower our guests to take that grounded, centered way of being in the world back into their jobs and their families, to recharge them. So if you're looking for a retreat, you should check us out, holycrossmonastery.com. So I am not just the monk, I'm the knitting monk. And what's the knitting part about? So I started knitting about 2 years ago because I couldn't garden in the wintertime. And I had, I think, just too much excessive creative energy, and I was driving some of my brothers a little bit crazy, and so I decided to take up knitting. As one of my brothers, Joseph, would put it, it's my winter sport. And as I like to say, I took up knitting, but then knitting took me up. So as you all know, because you're watching a knitting podcast, it becomes a little bit of, in its darker ways, an obsession, and in its lighter ways, kind of a way of being in the world. And for me, it is really central to my spirituality. It's central to who I am as a human being. And I love it that the word maker is becoming more prevalent, because for me that's really what it's about. It's about creating something with my hands that uses the stuff of the earth, that puts me in relationship with the ground, with the sheep, with the dyers, with this wonderful community online, that gives me a vehicle through which to express my humanity, which is to say my creativity. And for me, that's in relationship to what I experience as God, to God, and so that's a really, really central part of who I am and what I do and what I'm about. Because it's through making things and sharing what I have made that I come to know myself more fully as human, and I think that's a wonderful thing. I also think it's important to say, I'm not a professional, and I don't aspire to be a professional. I'm really an amateur maker, an amateur knitter, in the truest sense of that word. And the word amateur comes from the Latin word to love. So an amateur is really somebody who loves. So I'm an amateur knitter. I love knitting. And I do it because I love it. I don't do it because I make my living from it. And I'm excited that people make their living from it. I think that's really awesome. But I'm not one of those people. And I don't aspire to be either. I'm not a prodigy knitter. I'm not a prodigy monk. I'm not a prodigy human being. I'm just a regular old person, and that's really what, in some ways, what knitting and what my entire spiritual life, my life as a monk, what they all help me to do is to be more fully who I am, and to come into a deeper, deeper connection with who I am. So that's just a little bit about the knitting part and the monk part. I will say, too, that my knitting philosophy really comes down to maybe like the third project I did, which was the traveling cable hand warmers by Purl Soho. And I started them, I've been knitting for maybe two months at that point. I started them because they were so beautiful, and I really wanted to make something that beautiful. What I didn't know was that cabling, when you are new to knitting, is really hard. So I just dove in, and when it got really hard, I was too stubborn to quit. And I just kept on with that project until I finished it. And what happened was I did something really hard, and I stuck with it, and I learned a lot from it. And so that really characterizes kind of how I am in the world, and that characterizes my knitting. I jump into projects because I want to make them. And if they're hard, then I've learned a lot by the end of it. And I don't have any hair that I could pull out anymore because I shaved my head now. So it's all good, and I learn a lot from it. Why have I started this podcast? Well, I've started it because I have really found an important home in the online crafting world, particularly on Instagram, and I'm so inspired by the work that I see, and I'm inspired by the creativity, and I'm inspired by the generosity. The community online is really amazing. For various logistical reasons, it's really hard for me to get to my local yarn shops and to get to those knitting nights and, form a community in person of crafters. So I find that community online, and I want to give back to it in a more direct way. And I also think I have a unique voice. I have something unique to offer. And actually, we all do. that's one of the beautiful things about being in this crafting community, is that everybody has something to offer, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm glad to do my bit and offer my piece to it as well. I'm going to try to keep these things short, to half an hour, and maybe every other week. We'll see how it goes. This is the first time. So I'm going to just go through 3 finished objects that have come off the needles in the last couple of months. They're not the only things I've knit, but they are really meaningful projects that I've worked through recently. So let's go ahead and get started with that. The first object is the Fartole Scarf. This is from Jared Flood's book, Woolens, and this book is just really incredible. It's like an advanced course in knitting and choose your own adventure kind of rolled into one. And at the end you get these beautiful objects that you have made with your own hands and a bit of stick and twine and whatnot. Because, Jared, my good buddy, he just pays such close attention to detail, and he gives really beautifully detailed instructions and allows you really to make these projects your own, and to learn kind of relatively advanced knitting techniques without being overwhelmed by them. So this is the Fartole Scarf right here. Mine is about 72 inches long, and about 9 inches wide. You can see that they're kind of syncopated cables here. So this one is 14 rows, this one is 9 rows here. They match up eventually. You've got this 2x2 ribbing at the bottom. And each of the cables has, you can sort of see it in there, has some seed stitch right in the middle row of the cable. So it's a really textured, beautifully cabled piece. And my favorite detail here is that there's a really beautiful, elegant, very simple, actually, I-cord edge. So it gives this really lovely edge on the side. I knit this up in the Plucky Knitter Traveler Aran, which is superwash merino, yak, and silk. So it's super soft, but it's very tightly plied, which means that cables and textured stitches really pop in it. It's a wonderful yarn. I knit with it a lot. And this is the color Give a Hoot, which is from their fall collection last year, fall line of colors. And it's just really soft and really beautiful. I think this is a great example of what I do with my knitting, because I started this project for myself. I wanted a scarf, and I hate knitting scarves, so the only way I can ever get them knit is to knit them for myself, because then the motivation's really there. But I finished it, and I said, I know I started this for me, but I think this is really for my aunt. So I'm getting ready to send that to her. She's with my mom right now, who is in the middle of chemotherapy. She was diagnosed with breast cancer a couple months ago, and she's really having a hard time with the chemo, so I'm glad that my aunt is able to be there with her. It's obviously August, so it's really hot, and they're down south. Who needs, a scarf in the middle of August in the south? But it's just a way to say thank you, I love you, I'm with you, and here's something beautiful, here's a gift, here's something that was made for you, just to say I love you. So that's the Fartole Scarf. The second finished object I have is actually along the same lines, and I'm calling this for myself. Ooh, you just got a peek. I'm calling this the Pure Gift Scarf and the Total Gratitude, Shawl, Pure Gift Shawl, because there's an amazing story to me, behind it. We had a brother here at the monastery who left right before I came, actually, and he was a knitter and a crocheter. And he left behind some of his stash. I know you can't believe it, a knitter would leave behind some stash, but he did. And there's this beautiful variegated yarn, and I had no idea what it was because there's no label attached to it, but I loved the colors, and there was a 140-gram ball of it. I've had it for about 2 years now, and I haven't done anything with it. So fast forward, and my mother's going through chemo and breast cancer, and she has this amazing friend down there named Susan, who is so generous and kind and loving to her. And I decided I wanted to make Susan a shawl as a way of saying thank you for being so good to my mom. And then I saw this yarn, and it reminded me of Susan, and I thought, well, there you go. I'm going to use that yarn. So already the yarn was a gift. Susan is a gift to my mom. I wanted to make a gift. And then I cast on this shawl. It's the Reyna shawl, I should have said that. The Reyna shawl, which is a free download on Ravelry. It has over 5,500 projects. So you have probably made it even. And I cast it on during my vacation in Maine, staying at the house of some friends who had lent us their house for 10 days. So again, pure gift and generosity there. And then the last piece of that gift was that I discovered that the landscape around Bailey Island, where we were staying, really matched the colors of the shawl basically exactly. It was really incredible. It was like the landscape was rising up to meet this gift, and I found the landscape to be such a blessing while I was there. So I made this shawl. You can see right there. This is there are some garter ridges, and then there's this really easy yarn over knit two together lace pattern there. This yarn has these beautiful kind of this dark steely blue, which was the color of the ocean, and this silvery gray here, which was like the rocks. And then there were these incredible patches of seaweed that kind of glowed golden in the light, so that's reflected there in that part of the shawl. Very easy to make. I am not a lace knitter. I knit cables mostly. I knit mostly for men, but this was a really great intro lace project, and it just used it used a little more than one skein of yarn, but I think you could make a small shawlette with one skein of yarn, and it's free on Ravelry, so can't get much better than that. Again, that's the Reyna shawl, and that is by Nora Laivola, Laivola. But all this will be available in the show notes at the bottom of the YouTube page and on my knitting blog as well. The last finished object I don't have with me, but I will insert some pictures of it right here. This is the Auster Pullover. It's by Michelle Wang for Brooklyn Tweed. It came out, I think, about a year ago. And I knit it up in Briggs & Little Regal in the colorway Sage. Now, this was a great project for me for many reasons. One of which is that, like most people, I equate the amount something costs with its value much of the time, even though I know better. And Briggs & Little wool is not expensive. I paid around $30 for a sweater's quantity of this yarn. But it's really wonderful. It's really wonderful. So it was suggested to me by my Instagram friend Julia, who makes beautiful, beautiful things, and she had knit a sweater for her dad in this yarn, and I was asking her about it, and she said it was really great, so I'm glad I took her recommendation. It's scratchy in the skein, it is, but I like that. I mean, I like something that actually feels like wool, particularly in sweaters. I'm told it's very hard wearing. The colors are really deep and rich. The green in this sweater goes from gray to green to blue, depending on the light that you catch it in. But it's woolen spun, so it's really lofty, and it's really warm. Like, my legs were sweating when I was seaming it together in August. But it softens up a lot, actually, as it's blocked. And the pattern itself was just fun to knit. I mean, I love cables, and this was not your typical cable pattern. It was not very intuitive, I have to say. The cabling was not intuitive, but it was relatively easy to memorize the chart. So by the time I started with the back, and then by the time I got to the front of the sweater, I had pretty much memorized the cable pattern at that point. And then I have to say, this is the second seamed sweater I have made. I absolutely love making pieced sweaters like that, much better than knitting sweaters in the round. I don't know what it is about knitting in the round. I just hate knitting sweaters in the round. But I love knitting them flat and seaming them together. And my Instagram friend Selma, who also has a wonderful podcast you should check out called Little Big Knits. She's Selma Knits on Instagram. She had asked me about how I manage fit when I'm knitting sweaters in pieces. And I have to say, for me, I actually find it much easier to manage fit in a sweater that's knit flat, because I get a lot of gauge trouble when I knit sweaters in the round. I try to be a good little knitting boy and do my gauge swatches, particularly for a sweater. And I have to say it was really important with the Auster pullover, because the knitted piece was very scrunched up. It's sort of based on a 2x2 ribbing, even the cable pattern. And blocking it really opened up that pattern a lot. So the finished measurement was very different once it was blocked. But anyway, so when I'm knitting my gauge swatch for a sweater in the round, something about knitting in the round, I just tighten up, and so I always end up off gauge when I knit in the round. When I knit flat, my gauge is the same as the swatch, I really prefer it that way. And then also when you have to rip out, like if you're ripping out 2 inches of a flat piece, you're just ripping out 2 inches. If you're ripping out 2 inches of a round piece, you're ripping out essentially 4 inches. You're ripping out twice as much. So I prefer it that way. This was a sweater for one of my brothers, for Bernard, and it was not a surprise. He knew that I was working on it, but it fits him great. He looks great in it, and his eyes just really lit up every time he had it on during our vacation. So it was a joy to make that for him. And and the other thing about seamed sweaters, and this was true seeing him wear the sweater too, was that you knit these pieces and they're beautiful, but they're just pieces of fabric. And then once you've seamed them together, they turn into an actual sweater. So there's this big transitional ta-da kind of effect that happens. And I find that really special. The thing that was tricky about this sweater for me was that I did the tubular bind-off for the first time on the collar. That thing uses Kitchener stitch at the end, which I'm a fan of. I like Kitchener stitch. I know how to do it. It works fine. But something about it, I did the Kitchener stitch so tight, and it made the collar like literally about that big around. So I could not fit it over my head. And I had to actually cut my knitting. I had to take scissors and cut open the bind off, which was terrifying. I've never steeked before, for instance, so I've never taken scissors to my knitting. And then I had to rip back part of the collar and pick up the stitches and finish it again. The second time around, I did not bother with the tubular bind off. I was ready for the sweater to be done, and so I just used a regular bind off in pattern. And it looks fine. Looks great even. I will do the tubular bind off again at some point, but not at that moment. And that's the thing about knitting. For me, it doesn't have to be perfect. If it's perfect, it might as well just come from the store. This is a handmade object, so the flaws are part of it. It's like our humanity. The flaws are a part of it. So why not have that reflected in our knitting as well? Enough of this perfection business. Just a little sermonette on perfectionism. It is the enemy of creativity, the total enemy. There's nothing that kills creativity more than perfectionism and comparing. And I'm plagued with both of them, so I'm trying to, slowly but surely, trying to work myself away from them. And my knitting is one of those places where I practice, so that's great. And so those are the finished objects that I've had recently. Moving on to some works in progress, I really only have one thing to show you for work in progress because I am a monogamous knitter for the most part, and I don't like projects that stretch on and on for months on end. I like to start them, finish them, move on to something else. And I just feel like they're hanging over my head waiting to be done, calling out to me, knit me from their little basket if I don't just work through them. So I am just working on one project right now, and that is the Jones cardigan by Tin Can Knits. This is for my soon-to-be little godson, Max. My good friends Meredith and Christopher had their first baby back about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, and they asked me if I would be his godfather. So I'm super honored. These are great friends of mine. They're awesome parents already. They're going to continue to be awesome parents, and I'm really happy that I get the opportunity to be in this little boy's life, hopefully in a positive way. So I knew I wanted to make him something even before he was born. So I bought this Barocco Ultra Wool is what it's called, Barocco Ultra Wool. It's 100% superwash merino. It's really soft. It feels like working with cashmere almost. And the lady at Country Wools over in Hudson, New York, I can't remember her name, but she was very helpful, and she said that this you can throw this yarn in the washer and the dryer, no problem. It always comes out just fine. So we'll see, but it's certainly working up well in this this little Jones cardigan. So let's hold this up here. You can see it has this rope cable here and moss stitch and this little shawl collar. I mean, can you imagine cables and a shawl collar on a little baby? Is that not going to be the most adorable thing you've ever seen? So there we go. I'm working on one of the sleeves right now. And really, just to top it all off, and I'll have to take pictures because it'll be the cutest thing when it's done, the Jones cardigan was the first sweater that I ever made myself, the first cabled sweater, actually the only cabled sweater I have ever made myself. I made it about 1.5 years ago, and I just loved it. And so when I'm done with this little cardigan, I will have a matching one. So it'll be matching godfather, godson cardigans. It'll be super cute. But I'm really excited about this project. And just a shout out, really. Tin Can Knits has wonderful patterns. They've got great tutorials. They're perfect patterns for beginners. They're perfect patterns for advanced knitters too, but particularly for beginners because they walk you through every step of the way, and they have these great online tutorials, a lot of free patterns as well. The Jones cardigan is not free, but it's a really approachable cardigan pattern. I highly recommend it, and it's beautiful. So check that out if you have a chance. I didn't bring the swatches with me, but I have swatched for a Cordova sweater for myself, also by Michelle Wang for Brooklyn Tweed. It is a woman's sweater, but a lot of folks have adapted it for men because it doesn't have waist shaping or anything like that. It's just got staghorn cables down the front and Trinity stitch on the side. So I swatched that up in a very dark black-blue color of Briggs & Little Regal, again, for myself. And I'm leading a pilgrimage trip to the UK in October, and I'm hoping this will be my Aran sweater equivalent for that trip. So I'm really looking forward to that. We are almost at half an hour exactly, and I'm going to try to keep these podcasts to half an hour. So, with that, I'm just going to bid you happy knitting, and thanks for checking in. Check me out on Instagram and any of my other social media links, and I hope to see you back here next time. Till then, happy knitting.